Please turn to page 62 for Imaginative Narrative Writing at Stage 5. At this point, your students are ready for Stage 5 if they can sequence a simple paragraph story, the sentences, and they're writing sentences that are sophisticated and transition smoothly. And the reason why it's important that your students can do this is because at Stage 5, what they will be doing is now moving on to a longer story where they have to now look at beginning, middle, end, and then be able to sequence actions in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. So if they are unable to just have a simple sequence of actions, one sentence after the other, which was learned in Stage 4, then when we move on to Stage 5, they will become completely confused. Stage 4 is critical for that sequencing. Stage 5 moves us to a longer story with a beginning, middle, and end, and sequencing actions, thoughts, dialogue in each beginning, middle, and end part of the story. Let's go ahead and look at, along with that purpose of Stage 5, to go to beginning, middle, and end, and longer stories, we're also going to look at this stage, whether or not a story will be 1 paragraph or 3 paragraphs, depending on how long it ends up becoming. So at this level, you're looking at beginning, middle, and end, sequencing in each part, and also deciding if you need to have more than 1 paragraph. That's a big jump from Stage 4 to Stage 5. The tools for Stage 5 begin with page 62. That's where you will have a chant, and this chant will be the imaginative narrative chant, in which you will teach the students all the parts of the story so that they understand what it is they are going to do in this lesson. So the whole idea is to introduce Stage 5 using a chant so that students have a basic overview of what they're doing at Stage 5. On page 63, this is a teacher at a glance page for you to refer to, not only to teach the steps, but also it gives you helpful hints to give the students at each one of those steps. Let's turn the page to page 64-65. On page 64, you will see the imaginative narrative checklist. When your students finish writing, use this checklist in order to evaluate their papers, to assess how well they're writing at a Stage 5, what content and organization needs to be at this level. And it's all listed here for beginning, middle, and end, what you should find in their paper. Also at the sentence level, what types of sentences, what do they need to have in their sentences at this point? And again, a checklist is there for you to use as you assess their papers. And finally, mechanics. What do they need when it comes to paragraphing, capitalization, punctuation at their writing at this stage? You will also notice the student chart that you will display for students to follow the steps to fill out their organizer. This chart could be just made by hand, where you could look at this chart and make one on your own, or you can download this free by going to our table of contents in this online training, and you will see this chart, Stage 5, will come in an 8.5 by 14 colorful chart for you just to download, print, to display for your students as you walk through the steps. The last page at this Stage 5 is a sample planner, what a planner would look like once this stage is finished, student planner, and then you will also see a piece of writing at this stage. All these pages that I just went through are here for you to use as a resource. In addition to these resources, the manipulative tools that you will need in order to teach this lesson will be the following. On page 75 in your manual, you will find a tools section with many manipulative tools. For this stage of writing, you're going to need to make into little cards the emotion cards. These cards will be used so that your students can have more interesting stories and ideas if they can't come up with some on their own. Another tool, the do, say, and think cards in that section. So when they plan their story, they'll decide whether they're going to plan an action, whether they're going to write some dialogue, or a thought. Also in the tools section, I suggest that you print up and put on little cards the 5 senses so that when you're ready to add descriptive language, whether it may be adjectives or figurative language, you can use these cards to give the students an idea of whether they should add what something feels like, sounds like, tastes like, etc. I also suggest that you get a salt and pepper shaker, fill it with some beans, so that when you do add fancy words, you can shake the shaker before you do that. It's a wonderful little technique. Also in your tools section is a page that lists many transition words for narrative writing. What I suggest that you do, print this page up, and then you put it on a piece of tag board so that you can fold the edges, and when you're writing, you can give this tool to your students so they can actually just prop this up on their page, and it's like a little narrative wall that's right on their desks. This is a fabulous tool because these are going to create better starters to their sentences. These transition words are critical for students, and many times they can't just come up with them on their own. So they have a list of some ideas here. The organizer that we're going to use for this stage of writing will be on a legal-sized piece of paper in the landscape position. You need to tri-fold the page so that you have 3 boxes. I suggest that you already fold a stack of these pages before you hand them out to the students, so they have the 3 boxes already folded on their page. You, the teacher, will need to have an organizer as well to walk through this lesson. You could use that legal-size paper under a document viewer, or you could have a large piece of butcher paper that you put up on the board for the students to follow along with. It's really your decision, whatever you find is easiest for you to use when you're teaching a lesson. Let's get started with all the steps in order to teach an imaginative stage 5 narrative writing story. For an imaginative story, we don't have a story. A personal narrative is a true story, so you already know the story. That's why you tell it beforehand. But part of planning an imaginative story is that you have to come up with the ideas while you're planning. So what I'm going to show you are the steps in order to help kids come up with not just a story that makes sense, but also that's interesting. We will begin our lesson for our Stage 5 writing by introducing the lesson using a chant. The children are sitting at their desks with their legal-size paper in front of them. Before we start building our organizer, I will start by saying to them, boys and girls, we are going to learn how to write an imaginative narrative story at Stage 5 level. Let's hear a ooh. Ooh. Now everyone, ask me, say, what's a Stage 5 imaginative narrative? So the children ask me that, and I say, thank you for asking. Let's put our hands together just like this. Every story has a beginning, middle, end. In the beginning is the story opening, SC arrow. In the middle are actions, 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 where the character will do, say, or think. The end, what happened at the end of the story. And reflection, what did the character feel, learn, or wish after the story was over. Those are all the parts of our story. We now know we need a beginning with a story opening. We know we need a middle with actions, 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 where you do, say, and think. And we need an ending, what happened at the end, and a reflection. Boys and girls, we just learned that every story has what? A beginning, middle, end. So let's go to our paper and draw right down the fold. We draw our lines. We have 3 boxes, a beginning, a middle, and an ending box. Let's go to the beginning box. What do I need in the beginning box? Story opening. S, C, arrow. S is for setting. Setting tells us, touch your wrist like a watch, when and where. C is for character. Who's doing the action at the beginning of the story? Arrow is action. What is that character doing? We have our SC arrow for our story opening. We're also going to draw a line here because we want to sequence more in the beginning of the story. So let's draw 2 lines. We will have at least 3 sentences at the beginning of our story. A story opening, SC arrow, and then these last 2 boxes could be an action, a thought, a feeling, or dialogue. We'll decide as we plan our story. The middle, we're going to keep blank because we don't know how many actions where the character will do, say, or think in the middle. In the end, we're going to draw a line here because we will need to have at the end of our story our ending, what happened at the end, and we'll draw a picture next to this line. That line's going to be to plan out a transition later. We will also write TCR at the end of our organizer. Transition. This is a transition for a reflection, the last sentence of a story. Character. Who is the story mostly about? R is for reflection. What did the character at the end of the story feel, think, or wish once the story was done, after this happening, after this event happened to the character? We have our organizer completely labeled. Let's start with our steps in order to write our story. Step 1, we're going to plan our story opening. Let's go to the C for character. Character, who's in our story? A person, an animal, or an imaginary character. So I have the students talk to each other, I'll pick a stick, and someone will give us an animal, a person, or an imaginary character. If students have a difficult time or always come up with the same animal or same person, then what you want to do is say, animals, they live in different habitats. I could dive in an ocean and see a shark, a whale, a dolphin. I could see a crab, a lobster. I could go into the desert and see a snake, a coyote. I could run up to the mountains and see a wolf, a bear, birds. And go to different habitats. That helps me go into my brain and see more animals. Those are categories I could go into. I could do the same thing if I want to pick a person. A person lives, works, and plays. So I could say, lives. Who lives around me? Grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, my neighbors. Works. I could think of different types of occupations. A truck driver, a doctor, a firefighter. I could play, think of different things people like to do, activities from an artist to a mountain climber to a football player, a soccer player, a ballerina. So these are different ways to help kids come up with other types of characters by going to those categories. I'll have the students talk to each other, and then I will choose a child to give us a character in the story, and let's say the child came up with a snake. So together, the students and I are walking through these steps. We're going to all write about a snake. Why are we all writing the same story for our first lesson? Because they are learning the steps. Once they learn the steps, they can follow those steps to write their own story. This is a temporary activity in the sense of writing the same story. You want to only do this a couple of times. You want to move them into, you could go to table groups, mixed ability, or move them into partners, like ability, in order to start planning their own stories. Ultimately, you want them to independently write their stories on their own. Let's go to our step here. The child chose an animal and the child chose a snake. So we all are going to put a snake here. I can draw a snake or I can write the word snake. Does it matter, boys and girls? No. Whatever makes sense to you. On these organizers, I will either use keywords or simple drawings, icons, to represent the meaning of my story. These are not art projects, and these are not long, lengthy sentences with words. Keywords or simple drawings will help you get through the organizer at a fast rate and also not have the kids write all the words of their story on their organizer. It's a planning page. We have our character, we have our snake. Let's go to the S setting. When and where. Notice I'm doing when first. You always want the when phrase first and then the where because it makes more sense. So when will this story be happening? Then where will it happen? Well, let's go back and think about the snake. Before we decide on the setting, let's think of what kind of character this snake is. We could say the character's appearance. What does the snake look like? We could go ahead and talk about the snake's personality or how the snake feels right at that moment. Why don't we go to feel? Maybe the snake is really hungry, famished. So let's write famished. And I know that later we will go back and write describing words, but right now we're planning our character, and our character is hungry, famished. So once we plan what kind of character it is by describing their emotion, describing what they look like, or describing their personality, like greedy, silly, clever, then we will go back and now we will plan a setting. So the snake is famished. Let's go to the setting. What setting would be a great place for a famished snake to be? Do we want the snake to be in the drawer of somebody's room? That doesn't make sense. Do we want them to maybe be out in their own environment where they're a wild snake? Ooh, that might make sense. So let's have them in the desert. And when can we have them in the desert? Maybe it's a really hot day, like you can feel this heat and the snake is hungry and they're out in the desert. We have our when. Let's put our sun up there. It's a hot day. Where are we? In the desert. Let's draw a quick little cactus so that we can have a desert there. Let's practice this sentence. On a hot day, out in the desert, the famished snake. Maybe we can name the snake. If the snake is famished, it'd be great to give the snake a name that begins with an F. So why don't we say Frankie, the famished snake? Use a little alliteration there. On a hot day, out in the desert, Frankie, the famished snake. Let's do our action. The arrow is our action. Action! What did, notice I just used the word did because stories are told in past tense. What did Frankie the famished snake do out in the desert on a hot day? What was he doing? Oh, how about he was chasing a mouse because he's hungry? So let's put a little mouse here. We have our story opening, our SC arrow. Let's practice saying it. On a hot day, notice I'm making motions. I'm acting it out. We want to bring every child, every learning style into this lesson. On a hot day, out in the desert, Frankie, the famished snake, chased a mouse. So he could have his lunch or dinner. So he could fill his empty belly. There we go. So notice what I'm doing. I'm just practicing the sentence and I'm adding different words, different ideas, making it better. We finished our story opening using SC arrow, but notice we have space for 2 more sentences for the beginning of our story. This is because at this level, we want to write more. We want to make each part of the story longer. But it's difficult for kids to understand what to put there. So what we want to start doing is saying to kids, we have actions and we have reactions. When something happens, a character can react. And when they can react by doing something, but most especially they could react by thinking about something or saying something. So we're going to go to our story and say, let's see, Frankie the snake, the famished snake, is chasing after this mouse. We have our story opening sentence. Let's go to the next sentence and make a reaction. Let's have the mouse react to this action of being chased. Let's reveal what the mouse is thinking in the story. So we're going to use the template to say, draw a line, put a comma, and a thinking bubble. We're going to find out what the mouse is thinking because the mouse is being chased by this snake. So we draw our line. That's going to be the marker saying who's thinking or saying something, comma, and in this dialogue bubble, we're going to put our quotation mark. And now think of different ways that we can tell what the mouse is thinking. So what is the mouse saying in his head as it's being chased by Frankie the famished snake? This is when I model many different ideas to the kids and then I have them talk to each other and come up with ideas. Maybe the poor little mouse is saying, oh no, I'm going to be Snake's dinner. Or I better get out of here before I become that snake's lunch. I must look like a meal on wheels to this snake. So I model many different ways to reveal what the character's thinking to show they're frightened. And then I have the students talk to each other. We come up with an idea and we write it in our thinking bubble. I also at this point say to the kids, you can write your own. You don't have to write exactly what I'm going to write. So maybe I'm going to say, oh no, I may be Snake's lunch. I have my beginning and ending quotation marks. Sometimes to show this to the kids, I'll say boys and girls, I've decided I want to say, oh no, I may be Snake's lunch. How am I supposed to write that out? I'm going to start with a quotation mark. Quotation mark. Oh no, I may be Snake's lunch. Close quotation mark. So what do quotation marks do? Quotation marks start and end the talking part. They start and end the talking part. Or, in this case, the thinking part. And why are we putting quotation marks around the thinking part? Because the snake is talking in its head. We're hearing what it's saying in its head. After we wrote this out, we go over here and we're going to put the little mouse, because this is who said it. I could write mouse here, or I just drew a picture of the mouse. Mouse, and then what did mouse do? Mouse said or thought? Oh, we're thinking. So I'm going to write the word thought here. Mouse thought, oh no, I may be Snake's lunch. We now have an action and a reaction in our sentence. The person reacting is the mouse. Let's have the snake react in the last box. But before we do that, let's practice. Go back and rehearse what we've already planned. One hot day out in the desert, Frankie the famished snake chased after a little mouse so he could fill his belly. Mouse thought to himself, oh no, I may be Snake's lunch. All right, what are we going to do in this last box? We could skip it and just go on to the rest of the story, or we could have another reaction. Who's left? Snake. Well, do we want Snake to think something or say something? Let's have Snake say something to the mouse. So we're going to draw a line, put a comma, and a dialogue bubble. What would Snake be saying as he's chasing this poor little mouse? Again, I'm going to think of some ideas. Sss or hiss, you're going to be delicious. Hiss, I love mouse for supper. Ooh, that's a good one. Now I have the students talk to each other and they come up with different things the snake could say. Once we come up with our ideas, we go and we record what the snake is going to say in the dialogue bubble. Remember, start with your quotation mark. We write down that dialogue. In this case, I have hiss, I love mouse for supper. And I've talked to the students about how we could say dinner, but let's use supper because it's a snake and it's making that sound. It sounds better to have that S. Again, more of the alliteration. Who is saying this? I need to have my marker. It's snake. I think this time I'm going to write snake. And then what did snake do? Snake said, hiss, I love mouse for dinner. We have the beginning of our story. We have our story opening at the top with SC arrow. Then we decided to have a couple of sentences to show a reaction. And we decided we wanted to show the reaction of the mouse and of the snake by having them think something and say something. Once we have the beginning, the next step, and this is what's very interesting and different from many other ways to plan a story, and that is we're going to jump to the end of the story. Once we have our beginning and we reveal the characters through actions and reactions, we're going to jump to the end and say, what happened at the end of the story? Why am I jumping to the end of the story? Well, the reason why is because so many times kids get a beginning going and they get pretty good at it, but they get the middle confused and they get unorganized, out of sequence. It just doesn't even make sense because they're not looking at an ending. They don't have an ending to guide them there. When you know your beginning and then you have an idea of the ending, and in this case, when you have an idea of an ending, what you want to do is you want to say, boys and girls, we're going to pick an emotion card to come up with the ending. And I'm going to identify what happened in the end. How did the character feel? I'm not going to say exactly what happened as in what were the actions. I'm just going to talk about how did the character feel at the end, because that will help guide us in the middle to get to the end of the story. So we know the character's over here chasing after the snake. What happened at the end of the story? And I may ask the students to pick a card. So I take out the emotion cards and I have a child pick the ending emotion. Let's say a child picked at the end, one of the characters was embarrassed, felt silly at the end of the story. So what we're going to do is make a quick little mark over here in the corner showing a silly face. We identified the beginning of our story. Our snake is chasing this mouse. The mouse is scared. The snake wants to catch it. The end, the snake is going to look really embarrassed and silly. So I don't think the snake was successful at the end. So we're going to say in the beginning he's chasing the mouse. At the end, he's not successful and he's actually really embarrassed. What happened in the middle? Let's plan our middle actions. How are we going to get these actions to get to the embarrassed part? And that's really important that we have it set up like this, because if you know your beginning and in the end something embarrassing is going to happen, it's going to help you plan the middle a little bit more effectively. You have somewhere that you're heading. You're not just sort of planning actions and have no idea of where you're going. The first thing we're going to do in the middle, so we have our story opening in the beginning. Let's go in the middle. We're going to have actions, actions, actions where we do, say, or think. I'm not sure what to do next. I'm going to put my number 1 with a line, but I'm not sure what my next action is going to be. Because sometimes the kids say, okay, the snake said, I'm going to get you for dinner. And then we'll go to the middle for the middle actions. All right, boys and girls, what happened next after the snake hissed, I'm going to get you for my supper? And the kids say, oh, he kept chasing the mouse. It's really difficult for kids sometimes to come up with the next action. That's why we're going to have the emotion cards again. Every time we come up with a new action, if they can't come up with a good idea, we'll just pick an emotion card. Why? In stories, when you're reading a story, a character does something or says something that leads to an emotion. So if you can't come up with an idea, pick an emotion and that will help you create that action or dialogue or thought to get to that emotion.